Hi, and welcome to another episode of Surrendered Birth Stories. Birth stories, birth education, and the pursuit of surrendering it all to God. Let's get started. Hey everybody, happy Monday. Hope you're having a great day so far. If you are listening to this on Monday anyways. But today's guest and I go back about a decade to when we were teaching first grade together at a local charter school here in Greensboro. And oh, how different we were back then just from who we are today. Even though we both left the teaching field and she ended up moving out of state, we kept in touch over the years, and I was so grateful for her willingness to just come share her birth stories. So she actually has 4 sweet babies, but today we're just going to hear her first 2 stories. And actually today's episode is a little more about the trauma that can easily come along with giving birth in the mainstream medical system. So just a heads up, we have some hospital stories today, and some, parts of it are hard to listen to or aggravating in hindsight for sure. We also do discuss miscarriage today. So if your heart is not in a place to hear that, just make sure you revisit this episode at another time. But let's meet Bethany, a woman full of the Spirit of the Lord. Welcome to the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast. I'm so excited that you're here today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, Kayla. I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to share these stories and just to give God the glory. My name is Bethany. I have 4 children. I live in Virginia, and I don't know if the people know, but we used to teach first grade together down the
Yes,
hall.
we did, like a decade ago.
I know. So I am not teaching in the public school system. I do teach at home with my kids. I have 4 children, and we're dabbling in homeschooling, and I stay at home with them. So it's a sweet life. We've got chickens, and we're doing that whole thing.
Hey, that sounds a lot like my current life. Homeschooling 4 kids, chickens,
Exactly.
all the things.
So it's really sweet, and we just love a good forest frolic. Yeah. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, 4 stories, so we're going to jump in. So
Okay.
tell me what it was like finding out you were pregnant for the first time. Was it something planned, unplanned? Did you have any idea? How did you and your husband react?
So, okay, I was elated. It was planned, and I just like could not wait to have babies. I remember having so many conversations with my husband, like, please, there's a time, like, and had been 2 years we'd been married, and he was in school, and, I was working. The first year as a teacher, as you know, and then the second year I was like a project manager at a big university here. So I was just like hankering to be a mom, and he finally gave in. It was like, okay. And so we got pregnant right away, and I couldn't wait. I was just so excited, and it just felt super surreal because I've always wanted to be a mom ever since I was a little kid. That was always wanted what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to have like 10 kids. And so it was just felt like, okay, this is happening.
Oh, that's so awesome. Okay, so how did your first pregnancy go? How did you go about choosing a care provider? Was it a healthy pregnancy? Were there any bumps in the road?
So I didn't know, social media wasn't really what it is now. So like I was informed slightly because I had a friend out in California who had had a few home births, and she just kind of knew more about the birth world. She had had like I think 2 kids by then, so I learned a lot from her. So I was looking for not to do a home birth at that point, just like to find like midwives. So I thought, oh, I could just use the midwives that are associated with the hospital and have like a similar experience. That was kind of my thought process. So I didn't go with like a traditional OB. I went that route, and um like had no clue, at that point I was 25, I think 24, 25. And um I knew some things to look out for, but I didn't really know like dietary as much as like, okay, you need like she would tell me, my friend would be like, you need to have a lot of protein. I'd be like, well, what's a lot of protein? Um Unfortunately, I was coming into the pregnancy very unhealthy. I had still like a lingering eating disorder that God had not healed me from yet because I had not sought healing for it yet. And that really set me up to be like malnourished and to really not have like a ton in my storehouse to give to my babe. And so I ended up getting preeclampsia. And the way they handled it was just like, okay, time to take this baby out of you. At like 30 weeks, I started to not feel great. And I was so tiny. Um, and I just remember being like, wait, what? Like, this is crazy. But I felt so terrible. Like, I just felt had headaches. I felt sick. I just I wasn't getting enough nourishment. And I really didn't know what it looked like to get nourished while pregnant. There weren't any like Instagram feeds at that time to be like, eat this, it was just like eat a bunch of protein. I'm like, okay, I can only eat so many hamburgers. So
Right.
yeah. So they wanted to induce me. And I remember um
How many weeks were you when they wanted to induce you?
So I remember going in, it was like 34 weeks. And I remember going into hospital, or they sent me to the hospital to have some testing done, and everything looked like fine, but I did not feel good. And I just remember being like, something isn't right. Like, I don't feel great. I wanted them to be like, okay, you don't have to go back to work. Like, just go home and rest. But I remember her saying, like, there's nothing we can do. You have to go back to work. And I was like, what? Okay.
Mm.
And so I went back to work. And then I think it was like I had another follow up the next week or two. And I was like 36 weeks at that point. And they were like, oh, actually, your blood pressure is super high. We're going to have to induce you. And, I didn't know I was informed to the degree where when I went and sat down, I did an initial interview with them and asked them a bunch of questions, which they like laughed at me about because they're like, oh, okay, really? Um, but I didn't know the epidemic of inductions that was
Mhm.
on the horizon. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. And so I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I do remember when I went to the hospital, I was like, I'm not getting an epidural. And I remember the nurse was like, you need to watch this video to see how painful birth is. So you know that you're going to want an epidural. And I was like,
What?
yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy?
Oh, man.
Um, I know. I was like, respectfully, I'm not going to watch the video. So just don't ask me. Like, don't ask me about my pain. So I did. I started the Pitocin. I think I ate like one more hamburger and then started the Pitocin. And well, they did like the Foley bulb, they did all that stuff. So then I ate my hamburger, and um they said, okay, we're gonna do the Cytotec, the Foley bulb, then the Cytotec, or whichever one, and
Yeah.
then
Cytotec
we'll
and the
move
Foley
on.
bulb.
Okay. So yeah, they did that, and then they moved on to, which I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was asking them for like handouts of everything. I'm like, can I see um the handouts that go with each of these medications and like the risk and blah blah. And they're just like, what? Like they didn't even have any of it. I had to
Yeah.
Google it. They didn't have it. Um so then the next morning I start Pitocin, and I think it was like 6 a.m. or so I started. And I had a doula in training who was going to come to my birth, who was like a coworker's wife. And she was the sweetest soul. And she came and just like held space in the room, um, and just prayed. And it was really good to have her there. And my mom came and like Matt was there, but Matt was like in and out. He didn't really understand like what giving birth was at that point. So he was like doing stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? Um, so I remember honestly, I was rocking it. I look back and I'm like, you were doing so good. Like I had such good momentum. I was so at peace. Like I was just moving through it. Um, and I felt very good and strong. But I think I was probably in hindsight in like stage two. So getting closer to transition, and I got into the tub, which was just probably a little bit too soon, but it was getting a little bit intense with the Pitocin. They just kept like bumping it up. I think it's before they kind of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do this so quickly. And I remember the midwife. I can't even. I like hate calling these people midwives because I'm like, you don't even know. But she comes in and she's like, "Oh, you're not going to be able to. Right now, your water is preventing this baby from coming, so we need to break your water." And I'm like, "What?" And I remember in my spirit feeling like that doesn't sound right. So I said, "Well, hold on, let me just think about that for a minute." Um, and so she's like, "Okay." So she leaves, and these like little residents come in to like watch me like a wild animal, and I'm like, what? I was like at that time I'm like, yeah, I'm all about education, come, what, like I want to like whatever. Now I'm like, no. So they were like watching me and like whispering about how probably crazy I was, for good reason, I guess. And um then she came back and was like, okay, what are you gonna do? And she's like, there's no other way forward. And I'm like, oh. So, I mean, I didn't know. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll do it. And she got her little knitting needle out, and she's like, you're going to have to get out of the water. And I'm like, no. And so I do. I get out and get on I don't even think I could. Yeah, I did. I got to the bed. She broke my water. It was immediate agony,
Mhm.
immediate, obviously. And I remember just being like, get me out of this bed. And I was like on all fours for a long time. And that's where it was like unbearable. Like I remember feeling like people were like beating me with a baseball bat. It was just horrible. And she would like try to do counter pressure, but didn't know. And it was terrible. So
Your
my,
midwife
the,
did?
yeah, the midwife.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that was nice she at least tried.
Yeah. She tried. And I was like, no, no, don't touch me. And then the doula there, she just kept saying, um, you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. And I'm like, I don't know about that. So then they were like, okay, you need to get into the bed, blah, blah, blah. It's like I had no clue. They were just kind of leading me along. And I was trying to like do my thing because I knew a little bit about like, okay, you need to like just let your body do it. But there was so much coaching happening, which I hadn't really said, like, don't coach me. I more just said, don't ask me if I'm in pain. So then I'm up in the bed and I was like, I'm not laying down. You cannot make me lay down. So I like bent over the back of the bed, like kind of on my knees.
Mhm.
And um, I was like, not even ready to push, like, not even at all. Like, it wasn't time yet to push. I had like not even transitioned all the way. And they're like, okay, here we go, like counting it out and just like being so intense and like, okay. So I'm like pushing and they're trying to tell me how to work with my body, but actually not really because they're like trying to tell me what to do beyond what my body was doing. And I remember like they were just like pushing me so hard. And I remember I was so close to getting her head out and I knew I was going to tear, but I was like, I just want to like be done with this. And they were like so intense. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to push her. And I remember feeling the tear and I was just like, oh my gosh, felt the tear. And then, she was out, literally the tiniest little person. Okay. She was literally like, how much was she? Like 5 pounds, 4 ounces, 5.47 ounces. So tiny. I should have never teared, but it was just like, she was just kind of like ripped out of me. And then, so it was like, it was intense. It was super intense.
Wow. I mean, I'm just like going through so many things in my in my head
I
right
know.
now about that. One, things that I'm not surprised about, but also I just hate that you had to go through them.
I
So
know.
then she came out, she was healthy.
Yeah, she was healthy. She was like a little low blood sugar, they said. And so, which because they starved me. I remember begging. I'm like, please, I have to eat because they weren't gonna let me eat. And they told me I couldn't eat, but I was like, okay, hindsight, I should have just eaten. For like it was like 2 days that they were like, because the induction takes a
Right.
while. So it took like all day. And, at that point I was literally used to eating like every hour, just something. And so of
Yeah.
course she was low blood sugar because I was super low blood sugared. So we got some colostrum into her. But other than that, she was totally healthy, just so little, just like a tiny little babe. She was just so tiny. And it almost just seems like she was like startled out of me, which she kind of was.
And did the preeclampsia and all your feeling crappy, did that just go away after she was born?
Um, yes and no. So then they were like, okay, we filled a medication for you. You're going on this. And I was like, well, what is that? What's it for? No one came to talk to me about it. It was like a blood pressure medication called labetalol. And I was like, can someone come explain this to me? Tell me how long I have to take this. Like, I'm not just going to take a pharmaceutical. I was still a little crunchy. Even though I didn't know everything, I was still a little crunchy. I'm like, I'm not just going to be popping pills. And they're like, well, you'll probably like die if you don't, they like go into that kind of stuff. And so I remember I think I took it for like 2 weeks and I was like, I'm not taking this anymore because my blood pressure went down. But what wasn't resolved from preeclampsia was I then just had severe, and this is also probably from nutrition and just all the different drugs they use to induce me, severe postpartum anxiety and depression, mostly anxiety with like a streak of depression. And so I was not well for a couple of years, honestly. Like I remember we were getting close to like 18 months, 24 months, and I'm like not okay. I'm like, and now there's so much research out about preeclampsia and pitocin and all the stuff that they use and just the effects of it. And unfortunately, I just didn't know. And so it took a lot of wisdom, a lot of prayer, and resources to kind of bounce back from that.
So, through that whole experience, through getting pregnant and your pregnancy and your induction into your birth, into the crazy anxious postpartum period, how do you feel like Jesus was involved with that? How do you feel like that affected your relationship with the Lord?
Um, that's a good question. I think there was like I was devastated, I think, honestly, because I just didn't expect such a startling entrance to motherhood. I thought it was going to be just really, I didn't think it would be like sunshine and roses, but I didn't think it would be traumatic like that. And so I just remember grieving, kind of like moving into this next chapter. Um, my firstborn, she like did not sleep hardly at all. She was like traumatized in her own little way. And so it was just right into like sleep deprivation. She was a super fussy, needy child, still pretty needy. um, but I, it was so far from what I thought it was going to be. So with the Lord, it was a lot of like, just crying out to him and just like, help, like I'm drowning. Like, it's just like, felt like I was immediately drowning. Like I went from like, everything was pretty sweet to like, and now I'm drowning. So it was a lot of just crying out to the Lord, and there just wasn't the same kind of resources. I didn't have the same community. I'd have friends that would bring things by, but it wasn't like none of them. I was the first one to really have a baby in my like group of friends too. So it was just, I was super isolated. So it was just like me and Jesus, and Matt was in school, and working. So I was just kind of like on an island drowning with the Lord and just praying that I was going to get through it.
Mm. Okay, so your baby's a couple years old at this point, and what prompted you guys to have a second?
So we had, so she was a couple years old. She was getting close to 3. I remember I was pregnant when she had her 3rd birthday. Like I was like almost due when she had her 3rd birthday. So I I knew in my heart like we wanted more. We both wanted more children, and I wanted to spend the time to kind of heal. And so I spent probably 2.5 years just like learning and researching and allowing God to start to work on me, like my heart, my spirit, but also getting the nutrition up to speed. And I did like a dissertation of research basically on like protein and preeclampsia because they told me it was like, oh yeah, it's the husband's sperm that causes preeclampsia. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense. And so I just remember doing a ton of research and feeling like, okay, if we ever did this again, at least I'll, know more about this piece of it. I'll do my best, and just pray that the Lord can, use that and multiply it. And so um we kind of were like, okay, like I think we're ready, but there was still a big piece of me that was like terrified and truly still had, this is important. This is, yes, okay, thank you, Lord. So we, Matt and I at that point still kind of operated in a very like, oh, kids, once you have kids, it's like they're expensive and, there's like, you can't do as much and you want to travel and like all these things that you hear kind of mainstream about kids. We were kind of like trapped in that. So the thought of like bringing another one in was like kind of like inconvenient, but we want more kids. We want our firstborn to have a sibling because if they're an only child, they'll be like, weird. So like I had gone so far into that brainwash area and I didn't realize it, and I didn't mean it in a bad way, but I was just kind of like, I just didn't have eyes to see. And so I was like, okay, I guess we're going to do this. You know, we'll allow God to give us another baby, basically, which is just like, wow, okay. So um, the Lord graciously allowed me to get pregnant again. And I still had that a lot of fear about having another child, going through the trauma, all that again, and a lot of fear about postpartum and like what that was gonna look like. And also that like that attitude of like, ugh, this is just blah blah blah. And I just remember the Lord, I just remember him kind of preparing my heart to lose that baby. And we did. We ended up miscarrying that baby. And
Hmm.
it was like devastating. And I was so surprised how devastated it was, but it was such a kind of a long process of miscarrying that I had so much time to like repent, seek the Lord, and say, okay, I've not that he was punishing me or anything like that, but he was giving me an opportunity to really truly appreciate the gift of a baby and life. And I remember when I had the miscarriage, I went in and they were like, well, you weren't very far along. I was like 9 weeks.
That's pretty far.
And, they kind of downplayed it. They're like, at least we know you can get pregnant again. These are the same people. I'm like, what? And I did not want to go back to them, but I really, slim pickings at this point.
Yeah.
So they really downplayed it and they didn't really tell me what to expect. And so I remember at home just going through an actual miscarriage and one being so devastated and so humbled. And two, it was like painful. And I was literally in like early stages of giving birth. And it was just so it was so sad, but it was important for me to kind of be humbled and to say, okay, the Lord gives and he takes away, and blessed be the name of the Lord. And we are going to be grateful for whatever he does or doesn't give us. And so it kind of turned it around, and they were like, okay, don't get pregnant for like 3 more months. And we're like, whatever. And so then we got pregnant like again, like the next month.
The next month.
And
Yeah.
I just remember we were just, we just sobbed. We were so grateful. And we were just like, thank you, God, like for giving us another chance and for trusting us with another one of your children. And we were so excited, truly. She was going to be our little rainbow baby.
Okay. So now we are technically in our third pregnancy. And did you decide then to go back to those same midwives, or did we do anything differently this time around?
So I remember I went to go, I think I met with an OB like one time, and I was like, ugh, I just don't want to do this. I had kind of like white coat syndrome after that because of just all the blood taking and all that stuff. So I was like, I feel like I don't have a choice. And I will say that after I had that terrible experience with them, I did like 1,000 surveys and like called people, and I'm like, you can't do this to women who are miscarrying. Like, you have to equip them for like what they're about to walk through, no matter how far along they've been or not. Like, and they really did try to make it right. They, I remember, sent me like a bunch of stuff and whatever. And so I was like, okay, all right, I think I'm going to give them another chance. And I remember writing the midwife a note who had kind of be like just made it out to be like not a big deal, just kind of like saying, it was just so funny. I'm like, just kind of like, I know you're such a good midwife, and you know, you didn't mean to blah blah blah, just trying to encourage her, because I think truly she does have, like, she could be a great midwife. And so I really felt like, okay, I'm just gonna like let there be like redemption here, and I'm just going to walk back in and just let there be another opportunity. So I'm coming in like that. They don't care. Okay. This is like a business though.
Right.
This is not like relationship building. And these are people that are a part of a very large system. They're very busy. And so for me, it was such a big deal to walk back in there and just be like, okay, I'm going to, like, let's just start over. So it was really spiritual for me. And, it was a part of the journey. So I walked back in there, and they kind of off the bat were already like, you're probably going to have preeclampsia again, all that stuff, just already speaking it over me. And I was like, I don't know. I've done a lot of research. I've learned a lot about diet and certain vitamins and minerals and blah, blah, blah. And so um, I just was like, I don't receive that. So I just kind of went to those appointments and got paired up with a really sweet midwife who was different. That was the other thing, you would just see like random people. And so I finally was like, I'm just going to see this one person. Um, and so then they want you to do the glucose test. And it's like, a bunch of red dye and stuff. And with Finley, I did my firstborn, I did like finger pricks to like just monitor. And with this one, I was like, I'm just going to do that again. And so I did that, and I couldn't remember all the numbers and stuff that it was supposed to be. So I'm just writing it down. I turn it in, and they're like, okay, you have gestational diabetes. And I'm like, no, there's no way. There's no way I have gestational diabetes. And they're like, your numbers, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, there is no way. And I realized when I was doing the finger pricks, because I learned about my diet and all this stuff, I'm packing in the protein with like protein balls.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not washing my hands like right before I do the pricks. And I have residual like peanut butter on my
On your
fingers.
fingers.
Yeah. And so like my sugars are like off the charts, and they're like, it's too late, blah, blah, blah. This is what you have. I'm like, no, I know I don't. And I remember praying about it with the Lord. And in my quiet time, it was like the guy that's by the water, and Jesus is like, just pick up your mat, like you're healed, just like go. And I really felt like the Lord was like, yeah, you don't have that. Like, you're healed from that. Just pick up your mat and go. And so I was like, I'm just going to go in there and like just drink that poison and I'm just going to just do it. So I just like showed up. They didn't know I was like kind of sneaking in to do it, like my midwife. And so I was like, I'm just going to do it off the whatever and just have it on file for them to see that I don't have it. And I did it. And the nurse was like, okay, great. No gestational diabetes. You're good to go, blah, blah, blah. And I walk out from that appointment and my midwife is there. She's like, oh, and I was like, I don't have gestational diabetes. It was like, okay, we're going to still flag you because you're going rogue now. I don't think they ever changed my chart from like high risk after that because they were like, well, you know. So that was a win in my book, though, because I'm like, no, I'm doing this. So I was very healthy in my body. The unfortunate part of that season of life is my husband and I were just walking through a really hard season in our marriage. And so I was really, I was like under the shadow of his wings during that time, which is really beautiful. I felt very protected and I felt like the Lord was really with me walking through that season, but it was emotionally very difficult. And so there was a level of just like agony, underlying agony, kind of like a lot. And, you know, that's just really hard when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And so I got really ministered to the whole time. Like I had such an incredible community at that point. And I felt so loved and seen by the Lord. So, you know, I was able to bear kind of what we were walking through, but it was brutal. And I think my body was like and I was leading worship at that time. And man, they're having me sing these songs that were like so powerful and like belty, but I'm like, y'all are gonna put me into labor, like singing these songs. Literally, I led worship. It was like, I don't know. I just started to feel kind of off and I was 35 weeks. And I just remember thinking like I maybe pushed a little bit too hard. And I started to have a trickle.
Oh.
And I thought, did I break my water? Like, what does this mean? And I called my midwives and I felt just like unsure about it because I'm like, it could just be like a little something, something. It wasn't like too much. And I remember putting off calling them because I'm like, they're just going to be like, come in so we can like rip you open, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to sit back for a second and pray and just see. And my dog was like laying on top of me. And I'm like, oh, geez. So I had like a bowl of cereal, I remember in the evening. And I was like, all right, I'm going to call them. And so at that point, you know, we had my older daughter. So she was asleep. I wanted to wait till kind of she was in bed, which is pretty classic. And then I was like, I'll call. So then I called and they're like, yeah, you need to come in. We need to look at you and just like check you out kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll be in.
And this is 35 weeks.
This is like just about, I think I had just passed over to 35 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was kind of like, not sure. I had hired a doula for that pregnancy kind of towards the middle of it. And so I texted her and she was like, yeah, just come in. And so I drove in. I told Matt, I'm like, just stay here with Finley. You know, I'll be back. I'm not having this baby yet. So I drove in and I just like kind of walked in like with my keys. I didn't even bring anything because I'm like, nah, I'm not having this baby yet. And I didn't bring anything, but I wasn't prepared for like the tactics, you know?
Right.
So I go in and my midwife was already at or my doula was already at the hospital. So she was so great. She came in with me and at least she was there, but she's like a very like hospital birthy doula-y. And so, you know, so they were like, we're going to look at I'm not saying any of these terms correctly. Maybe,
It's okay.
you know, the like, we're looking for the fur.
They're looking for the amniotic fluid to see if it if that's what
Yes.
it is or not. Yeah.
Yeah. So they took like some liquid, like I swabbed myself and I was like, I'll do it myself. You don't need to do that. Um, and I remember they like kept bringing in like different people because they're like, oh, she's going to be a little bit more difficult this time. Because I was just kind of like, no, I mean, I felt fine. I truly felt good. I didn't feel like I wasn't like in labor yet. And it was just such a small amount on my like a pad.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but they were like, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and need to get this baby out. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm leaking amniotic fluid? And she kind of like brushed over the question. In hindsight, I kind of realized that. But at that point, I was so like at that stage, I was as surrendered as I possibly could have been to the journey. So I was very lighthearted about it. And I was just kind of like, well, if this is what is next, then I need a room with a big window in it. You can't stick me in a closet this time. So you have one of those. They're like, we'll go see what we have. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm gonna stay.
So, did you ever find out, were you leaking amniotic fluid?
They literally didn't, like, I didn't find out. I have no idea. I don't know.
You should ask for those
They
records just to know.
Right? Well, they wrote in there that I had a minor rupture. That's what it is. They wrote that I had like a somewhat of a rupture, but to what degree and
Yeah.
so they were basically just like and this is what she said. Well, in the past you've had high blood pressure towards the end of your pregnancy, so we should go. And I did not have high blood pressure with this baby, but she was just kind of she was trying to like convince me. So that tells me I was now a liability to them, which means
They wanted to go ahead and get the baby out.
it gets a little more sticky. So,
Great. Keep going. Let's see.
okay. So they're like, we're just going to go ahead and go for it. And so I'm like, I need that corner room, please, with the window, and something to eat. I'm eating. You can't stop me. At that point, things had changed a little bit and they had become a little bit more like, oh, we need to be a little bit more friendly to the mothers. So they were trying to accommodate my wishes. But I remember thinking, okay, here we go. And I was kind of dreading it. But I also felt like, okay, you can't go around it, can't go over it, have to go through it. I think that was my motto. And I'm just like, I have to go through this. So they're like, we're going to induce you and whatever. So they just start the process. And I am like, I'm starting to panic a little bit because it was just already. So I like stayed the night. And the first night was really great. I was there by myself because I told Maggie, like, just come in the morning. The nurse went to a church that we had been to a few times. So I had met her. We had gotten coffee before. So we were fellowshipping, having a great time. It was a good old time. And I'm like, okay, the presence of the Lord is here. Like, it's going to be fine. We're just going to get this done, get this baby out. And the next morning, things just like shifted pretty dramatically. And I really started to feel like fear for sure. Cause I'm like, whoa, this is going to be like super aggressive on my body because they're coming in with all their stuff. They're poking and prodding. I had to be stitched up with my firstborn and just all the different sensations you experience. And then lump into trauma in birth. I'm like starting to like feel that with this second birth. So anywho, they start the process and I'm just in total denial. I couldn't even I was like using different coping mechanisms like sarcasm and jokes because I'm like, I cannot do this. And my doula comes and takes me through like the mile circuit because I'm, again, 35 weeks. This baby's not even ready.
Yeah.
And I'm doing all of that. We did that, I think, like twice or something. It was crazy. Or my doula. Yeah, my doula did the mile circuit with me a couple times. And then that was just like so intense. And that kind of started to jump things a little bit. And there was a really sweet moment of like I would probably say again, like stage 2, just like worship and just like I was, the Lord had really become my head and my husband during that period of my life. And so I really felt like I was either A, gonna go home to Jesus during that time, or B, like he was just gonna walk me through this. And I really was like, okay, I'm gonna fight for that. Push back the fear, live in the perfect love. And so I did that for a good portion of, it's just like so exhausting, that spiritual warfare. And then and physical. And then, things aren't progressing as quickly. They're bumping up the numbers of Pitocin. It's getting dark and late, and I'm getting discouraged. They're wanting to push me along faster. I'm taking too long. I'm like, just slice me open at this point because I'm in agony. I just remember feeling, after it had been a whole day, a whole night, whole day, into another night, I just felt so discouraged. I literally was like, how do I get out of here? Like, I just want to escape because I'm hooked up to this thing that feels like it's assaulting me with every contraction. And they're telling me, oh, you're not even having contractions. I'm like, bro, I'm having contractions. Like, I know what they feel like. Okay. And they're like, well, they're not showing up on the monitor, or like, just so many mind games. It was horrible. Um, Long story short, if you want to hear more about that, you can go over and go into the depths. But long story short, I said unplug it. Like my doula was like, all right, we've kind of reached a wall here, and I'm like, yeah, we've reached a wall for
So
sure.
were you dilated at all at that point?
I wasn't letting them check me because the first time they checked me, they're like, oh, you're almost 1 centimeter.
Mm,
And then
mhm.
the second time they checked me, they're like, like 5 hours later. That was part of the pain because they'd be like, yeah, still around one-ish, maybe two, this the mind game. So then I said, you're not allowed to touch, like you can't check me anymore because this is doing more damage because I can't like labor for 5 or 6 hours and then you say you're only at a one, and then do it again
Right.
and then still at a one. So I said, let's just get the epidural. Like, who cares? It's fine. I'm not worried about it. It is what it is. I've done the best I can do. And they're like, you're against the epidural and and then they start to read me all the risks and all this stuff. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? You won't cut me open. You won't give me an epidural, which I don't know if I really wanted that. And I don't know. But I'm like, just get me through this. And they're like, well, we could try some gas. Because it was just, the pain was so high because I was so afraid. Like, I wanted to jump out the window.
Mm,
I wanted to like go in the hallway and go down the stairs and like run out of the hospital,
yeah.
um, and just be like, all right, I'm just going to do this over here. So I said, all right, let's do the gas. So we did the gas. And then it was enough. Like, I did like probably like 10 minutes of that. And it was enough to where I was able to relax and not have the fight or flight. Mostly I was just like a cycle of fight or flight. And then and then I knew I was transitioning. And then on the monitors, there's this like, "Pacha," like a massive boom. And then my water breaks. My water was not broken. Hmm. And I didn't know. I was like, what was that? I said it to my midwife. I was like, what was that? And she was like, what? What was what? She acted like she didn't even hear it. And then I'm all of a sudden, now I know, in transition, and I get into the tub and I'm like about to like want to push this baby out. And then they're like, okay, you have to get out of the tub because you can't push the baby out in the water in Virginia, according to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, are you on drugs? Like, how am I supposed to get out? This baby's head is coming out of me. Like, you want me to climb out of the tub? They're like, the water's going to be too cold, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, you're going to have to lift me out then. So they lift me out basically and put me on the bed. And I'm like, I'm not laying down. And so I did that same position and uh finally pushed that baby out.
So you were on your knees?
Yeah, like on my knees, like over the bed.
Yeah.
And then pushed my little baby, my little Okie girl out. And I just was like, oh, thank God. So I didn't really tear with her. And the unfortunate thing was because of all the insanity, I was like starting to hemorrhage, classic side effect. And she like literally had to reach back up inside me like 5 times to scoop me out.
Mm,
Yeah.
that is,
Yeah.
ooh, that hurts to think about.
Yeah. Yep. But Oki was so big. She was such a big girl for 35 weeks. She was almost 6 pounds. And the nurses were like, wow, she's so healthy and she looks so good. And she looked fantastic and was perfect. They like called NICU and I was like, why are you calling NICU? And they're like, okay, hold on, let's wait and see. And then they called NICU off because she was totally fine. So I was like, thank you, Jesus. So that was a miracle for sure.
And so, how long? So, you got to the hospital the night before and they confirmed that your fluid was leaking minorly. And then, how long between then and when she came out?
So I'm thinking it was like just at 24 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So because she was around midnight, it was like just past midnight.
So, what was her postpartum any different from your first?
Her postpartum was awesome. God had really healed me of like I had I had had like a gluten intolerance, like all these different things. And during that pregnancy, the Lord just like healed me of so many things. Just amazing. And postpartum, I felt fantastic because I had really, the Lord had taught me how to take care of myself, and I'd been healed from my eating disorder, and I just felt great. And I was so elated to have her, and I felt tremendous joy, and I didn't have any like postpartum depression or anxiety at all. Like I just been really freed from a lot of that. So afterwards was just really sweet. And she like her personality, she's just such a giver. And so I just felt like, wow, this is such a healing experience.
That's amazing. I love that. So, at that point, then you weren't crying out to the Lord for help as much as you were praising Him in joy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was just like living in the overflow. I mean, it was such a sweet time. And it was like a redemption period, truly, in a lot of different ways. And that was what I had prayed for in a lot of ways. So it was just like a level of like, okay, even though like I didn't even like look back at the trauma of the birth for a while because I literally couldn't. And I just wanted to enjoy that she was here and that I felt like my body wasn't falling apart. And I just wanted to enjoy that.
Yeah. So, at any point, did you look back at the trauma of that birth
Oh, yes. Yes.
before your next pregnancy, or was it later on down the road?
Um, before before my next pregnancy, like in contemplation of it, all of my pregnancies are very spiritual, and it's how the Lord has walked me through different strongholds in my life, and maybe other people can relate to that. And so there is such a surrender opportunity at every single pregnancy, every single level, because there's always more to give to the Lord. And so I remember after we had her, I was kind of like, okay, thank you, God. We're good. To and through. That was kind of our motto. We were kind of like, I literally couldn't even fathom having another child just because of how horrific it was, honestly. And there's so many more details that I literally probably have like blacked out of my memory. But I remember when she was probably like 4 or 5 months old, she was still really little. The Lord's saying to me, Oakland is not going to be your last baby. She's going to be a middle child. I remember him just whispering that to me. And I was like, what? No, to and through. Remember, Lord, to and through. And I remember him just being like, if you choose that, I will walk with you like step by step and we'll work through it each step. And I remember just that step by step, like at each level, we're going to work through this. And so I did. And a lot of this actually is documented on my podcast because I was walking into pregnancy, my third pregnancy when I started well, I shared all those stories. I just had her basically, but I share all those stories. Spoiler alert, I had another baby. So
Right.
I said yes to the invitation from the Lord, knowing there was going to be some serious, like, this is going to be not only a leap of faith, not only a trust fall, not only, but some serious, like, chains will be broken. But it's going to take like a full surrender situation. So, I was like, well, I can't say no because I love the Lord and I just want to be in fellowship with him. If he wants to give me something, like, I want to receive it, but I'm going to need him to, like, really walk me through it. And so he did.
Thanks again for joining us today. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting subscribe. Also, we'd love for you to leave a review of the show so that more people like you can hear more stories like these. If you're local to the Triad of North Carolina and seeking childbirth classes, birth consultations, or a birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to our website for more information. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. Also, if you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to get in touch with me. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.